Hope everybody's having a good day. Thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislators webinar, Expanding Broadband Opportunities in Rural America. My name is Representative Matt Lehman. I am the co-chair of the NCSL Communications, Financial Services, and Interstate Commerce Committee. I'll be your moderator for the day. This is the first webinar of the CFI Committee's Broadband and Telecommunication webinar series. The next of our 3 webinars will be our Expanding Broadband for Education and will take place on Monday, December 7th. For a computer schedule and registration of details, please visit our website, ncsl.org. Before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement. Over the next 75 minutes, we encourage participants through our chat box to feel free to type your questions and answer any questions in the chat box on your screen. To begin building some comfort with the chat function, to also learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you are calling in now. We will hold a formal Q&A after all the presentations are finished presenting. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the NCSL's website within the week. The National Conference of State Legislatures is a bipartisan organization that serves the legislators and legislative staff of the states, commonwealths, and territories. NCSL provides research, technical assistance, and opportunities for policymakers to exchange ideas on the most pressing state issues and in an effective and respected advocate for the interests of the states in the American federal system. Now that the housekeeping details are out of the way, let's get to why we are here today. To begin the program, we'll receive a federal update from the Federal Communications Commission. We're joined today by Susan Mort and Jessica Quinley with the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and by Audra Hale-Maddox with the Rural Broadband Auction Task Force. So, first up, we're going to have Jessica Quinley and Susan Mort with the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Jessica Quinley is an attorney advisor in the Mobility Division of the WTB, focusing on rulemaking and licensing issues. Prior to joining the FCC in January 2019, Jessica served as an attorney advisor at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Susan Mort is a legal and policy advisor with the Office of the Bureau Chief in the FCC's Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. She has over 20 years of experience in communications law, having also served in the Office of Native Affairs and Policy at the FCC and as regulatory counsel for Time Warner, Inc. Jessica and Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Just making sure everyone can still hear me. Despite my many years of experience in communications, I'm still struggling with Zoom, as I think many of us still are in the current environment. And hopefully you will be able to see our PowerPoint presentation. But if not, we will proceed accordingly. I know Justin and I are both pleased to be here to talk about the ways in which the Commission is promoting spectrum access for rural broadband. And we wanted to provide in 2 particular areas, the 2.5 gigahertz rural tribal priority window, as well as the 3.5 gigahertz citizens broadband radio service. Apart from those 2 specific areas, we also, though, wanted to start out by specifically referencing some upcoming auctions. The first is actually going to be starting in just a few days in the 3.7 gigahertz band. So while it's too late to participate in that particular opportunity, there are going to be a couple that will be coming up in 2021. For those of you who might be interested in participating in an auction or are tracking those activities, because that is kind of the most common way in which the Commission does make spectrum available. So again, in 2021, in the 3.45 gigahertz band, as well as in the 2.5 gigahertz band, we do anticipate that there will be commercial bidding and auctions of that spectrum. But with respect to the 2.5 gigahertz piece of things, that's just one piece of the broader puzzle with respect to that particular band. So if we could move to the next slide. What I'd like to talk about is why that band is so particularly well suited for broadband and advanced communication services, particularly in rural areas. And the primary reason for that is because of the higher power limits and because it operates at a lower frequency. What that means is, in essence, you have better propagation using fewer base stations. So that means your deployment costs could be potentially significantly lower. And also there's a certain embedded base of equipment that's already out in the marketplace because this band had been previously in use. It was not used in as fulsome a manner as had originally, I think, been conceptualized, in part because there were eligibility and use restrictions that were in the band. But as part of kind of a reconceptualization and modernization of the band that started in 2018 and then culminated with a report and order in 2019, the commission really did three things to kind of make sure that this band was used in the most fulsome way. So first, basically the commission changed the eligibility and use rules for existing and future licensees that enabled a broader range of participants in the band, as well as it enabled more secondary market transactions. So what that means is existing licensees got to keep their licenses. The eligibility and use rules changed so that they could then potentially lease or transfer some or all of the spectrum that they were using. So it just allows for more flexibility on a going forward basis. The second piece was the rural tribal priority window, which I will talk about in a little more detail in just a second. And then the last piece was the commercial auction, or the commercial bidding that I mentioned earlier. So once you back out existing licensees and successful tribal applicants, whatever spectrum remains unassigned will be put at auction. So that, again, is slated tentatively for 2021. Moving to the next slide. Let me just give a quick update on the 2.5 gigahertz rural tribal priority window, which is kind of first of its kind unique opportunity for federally recognized tribes to apply for licenses for unassigned spectrum over their rural tribal lands. You might say, well, why the rural limitation in that? It's twofold. One is obviously that is where there is a significant need, but also, as I said, the band had been in use previously and was used significantly more on the East Coast and in urban areas. So where there was the most spectrum available happened to be in these rural areas. So the commission had this unique opportunity, which ran from February 3rd to September 2nd of this year. We received over 400 applications from approximately 400 federally recognized tribes. We've already granted 157 of those. Another 57 have been accepted for filing, and we are working our way through the remaining ones and looking at those and evaluating them in due course. So I think by any metric, we've been very, very pleased with the level of participation and that we've already been able to get the spectrum out to folks who have a particular need, certainly in the current environment, but also more generally to close the digital divide that our Native nations face. So that's where things stand with the rural tribal window. And as I said, we'll continue our work and then look towards commercial bidding in the auction that will come for any remaining unassigned spectrum. So with that, let me hand things off to Jess, who will talk about 3.5.
Thanks, Susan. Heather, yeah, thanks. I was going to ask you to go to the next slide. So the 3.5 band is a desirable spectrum band because of its propagation characteristics, and it has a high channel width, which is great for rural areas as well. The 3.5 band is a different type of sharing model than we've seen in other bands. This is the first time that we're using something called a spectrum access system. That's an automated coordinator, frequency coordinator of the band. We have 5 of those that have been approved for full commercial use. And so that's a unique part of the 3.5 band that we're really excited to see how it works in practice. Right now, we've started with the general authorized access, which I'm going to focus on today in the presentation. So the three users in the 3.5 band are the incumbent access users, the priority access licenses, and the general authorized access users. Incumbent access, it includes federal authorized users, it includes some satellite folks, and for a finite period, it may include some grandfathered licensees in the upper part of the 3.5 band. The priority access licenses, we are reviewing a record number of applications. Over 20,000 priority access licenses were won in auction 105. We haven't granted any of those priority access licenses yet, but we are going through our review process right now. Many of those priority access licenses were won in rural areas, so we're excited about the mobile communication space that may come from these priority access licenses in terms of bringing more digital access and more opportunities, rural broadband opportunities to rural areas with those priority access licenses. And I will note that once those are granted, the secondary market for priority access licenses is very open in terms of what our rules allow. So to the extent that you need exclusive use and you don't have a license, then priority access license secondary market leasing or secondary market sale of a partitioned license might be something that your area might be interested in. And then the third part is general authorized access. This is an open, flexible access for the widest groups of users. You don't need a license to operate in general authorized access, which is unique for the FCC, and that's going to be the focus of the next few slides. If you could go to the next slide. So here's an idea of what the 3.5 gigahertz band looks like. It's 150 megahertz of spectrum from the 3550 megahertz to 3700 megahertz. And it has the incumbent access users that I mentioned are in that entire 150 megahertz, as well as the general authorized access are in that entire 150 megahertz. And then you'll see on the slide how that 150 is broken up into 100, which is that first chunk, and then that last part, that 50 megahertz at the upper channels, is broken into another piece there. And so that first 100 megahertz will be used by the priority access licenses. They're required to have band-wide operability in their equipment. That spectrum access system administrator that I mentioned in the last slide will be authorizing each PAL or a priority access license on a dynamic basis based on what's available in the area. In the county, we license the priority access license on a county basis, and each PAL, each county has up to 7 PALs that were available at auction. Many counties, all 7 went and were won, and then other counties, maybe only 1 or 2. You can see the available data about our auction on the FCC website if you want to know where the winners are. But there's no more than 7 PALs issued in any county. So that means even though there are 10 blocks that you see there on that screen, only 7 of those 10 will ever be used by license use. The other 3 will be reserved for general authorized access. And then also general authorized access users, or known as GAA users, can use any unused PAL channels as well. So if you want to go to the next slide. So they're licensed by rule, and what that means is our Part 96 rules, the general authorized access users are licensed by rule, which means that the Part 96 is the rules that you need to comply with if you want to operate on a GAA basis. And the general spirit of those rules require 2 things. One, that you coordinate with the Spectrum Access System administrator, and second, that you operate Part 96 compliant equipment. Of course, there's a lot more details in those rules, but as long as you, generally follow those 2 tenets, then you can operate on a GAA basis. And you have up to 80 megahertz in any given county, possibly more if the PALs are not being used. Thanks. And so that's what that third bullet means about the can operate on any unused priority access license channels. So what that means is if there is a licensee who won in your area, but they're not using the spectrum in that area, the SAS will be able to tell you that, that portion of your rural county is not being used by the priority access license, and therefore you can operate on an unlicensed basis using the general authorized access. And then it's non-exclusive use. So that means that if you do have a need for exclusive use spectrum, then GAA, that's one of the drawbacks. But if you just need something to, help your communications and internet system, GAA has shown a really promising use in a lot of areas. GAA is already under deployment in a lot of areas across the United States, and the spectrum access system administrators are listed on our website. So I recommend that if you are interested in operating on a GAA basis, that you reach out to the spectrum access system administrators and try to understand how they are managing spectrum in your area and what might be available to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you both of you for your presentation. And I think we see the resources there on your screen. We do have as our next speaker, Audra Hale-Maddox. Audra has been with the FCC Auctions Division since 2012. She now serves as the Chief of Staff to the Commission's Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force. Audra, the screen is yours.
All right, so I am going to talk to you today about a couple of the current or upcoming auctions that the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force is overseeing for Universal Service Funds. And so you've probably all seen the Universal Service Fund line on your cell phone bill or your regular phone bill. And it's just, it's a few cents to a little over $1. But what the commission does with that money is pretty amazing. For a long time, USF funds were used to push out, telephone lines to houses to complete rural telephone service. And then since 2011, the commission has been rolling out USF funds to extend broadband services into rural areas as well. And so the 2011 transformation order really reformed what the commission was doing with USF funds, because not only did it allow the commission to start using USF funds to support broadband services in rural areas, but it also committed to reforming the process by which USF funds were extended. And so the commission created a mobility fund to distribute support for mobile services, which that was an innovation that came about as a result of the transformation order. And they used competitive bidding to distribute support for fixed services, which was a new idea at that point as well. Next slide. And so after things got rolling with the transformation order, you may need to hit the slide again. The first auction that the commission rolled out under the transformation order rubric was Mobility Fund 1 and the Tribal Mobility Fund 1. And those were really sort of testing the concept of doing reverse auctions for USF. And they were providing one-time funding for sort of quick hit extension of service via a mobility fund, and then additional funding for tribal areas and service to tribal areas. Next slide. And then in the fixed side, the commission then started to push out these USF auctions in the Connect America cost model. And what that effort did was it created estimated costs of providing services by census block, and then census blocks that were above sort of the specified benchmark for how much sort of the average or an aggregate census block cost. If a particular census block was enough over what a typical census block would cost, then it would qualify for funding through Connect America cost model. And then in 2015, they offered that model-based support to price cap carriers who were already providing service. And 9 carriers accepted over $1.5 billion to provide services that end in 2020. And so we are looking very shortly to sort of doing an overview of the service that was provided under that program and reviewing what's been done and looking to the future. Next. So the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund is a currently ongoing auction that is extending a little over $20 billion over 10 years for fixed broadband and voice services. So, so phase 1 of that auction, auction 904, is offering up to $16 billion for fixed services. And that auction began on October the 29th. It's continuing right now. And we had a ton of interest in this auction. Many bidders were applying, and we wound up with 386 qualified bidders. And the way that that auction is operating is that bidders who were interested in participating to receive these funds to extend service to rural areas, fixed service, offered performance tier and latency combinations that they could provide in specific service areas. And so they could offer different combinations of quality of performance and latency in different areas. So if a particular area is close to a suburban area that they already offer service in, they might be able to offer higher quality service in that area than in a greenfield area where they're building out for the first time. And so we really wanted to capture the competing levels of service so that we could get the most service to the most places and not exclude some places that don't maybe have any service at all just because they need to receive maybe a performance tier that's different from the one that you know, a more suburban area might receive. But so 40% of the required locations in that auction were to be covered by the end of year 3, and an additional 20% by the end of year 4 and year 5. So as they are rolling out that fund, then in the first 3 years of service provided in that auction, the bidders who win in the auction will need to provide service to the required locations, 40% of them in the first 3 years, and then an additional 20% in the next years. And then by the end of the 6th year of funding, and this is a 10-year program, remember, but by the end of the 6th year of funding, they should be done providing service to all of the identified locations in their area. And if there are additional locations that are built during that period, then they have an additional 2-year time frame to serve additional locations that didn't exist when this program started. Next slide. And so the 5G fund has really attracted a lot of attention. 5G fund is intended to get high quality service to rural areas, and it's for wireless service. So the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund was for fixed service. 5G fund is for mobile service. And it covers $9 billion in 2 phases. The first phase will cover up to $8 billion in a reverse auction. And a reverse auction just means that the providers that are bidding bid to receive support. And as the auction rounds continue, they have to drop their bid to remain in the auction. And so we wind up with sort of the most coverage for the lowest amount of support. And so all areas across the country are competing against each other. So it's not guaranteed that every area that's eligible for the 5G fund will get a bid. And it's not guaranteed that any one specific state will get, you know, X amount of coverage or X amount of dollars. But we're looking for the most efficient distribution of the funds throughout the country. And then phase 2 of the 5G fund will focus on areas that haven't been covered already in phase 1 and on precision agriculture efforts. And so when we were asking for comment for the 5G fund, we asked providers and the public to let us know what they were thinking about how we should determine eligibility for this fund. Because for most of our other USF auctions, we've been coming in behind commercial expansion and trying to fill in gaps and holes where there's not a commercial case to extend a particular technology. And so that sort of, the commercial rollout has defined for us what areas are available that need support. But for 5G, we're actively trying to get ahead of commercial rollout and at least keep more rural areas caught up with more urban areas for the rollout. And so this was really sort of a thorny issue for us to determine how should we determine eligibility. So we made some suggestions. Should we determine eligibility by how rural an area is? Should we determine eligibility by whether an area currently has, say, unsubsidized 4G LTE, assuming that if they don't have that level of service, they're certainly not going to get 5G service without support. And so based on comment and based on analysis that the FCC did, we are going to wait on the DODC data collection. The DODC is the Digital Opportunity Data Collection, and that process is already underway to collect the best possible coverage maps that we can have. That's been sort of an ongoing multi-year process for the FCC to get the best coverage maps. And so we are going to wait for a first 5G fund auction until the DODC has provided better collection of data and better coverage maps to determine then eligibility for the 5G fund. But I think if we can go to the next slide, one of the other things that the 5G fund is adopting is performance reporting obligations and 5G upgrade obligations for legacy support recipients. And so legacy support recipients have been reporting to the FCC for years, very generally, that they are using the funds that are extended to them for the purposes that have been set out in the program through which they're receiving legacy funds. And that's kind of about it. But so with adoption of additional rules in the 5G fund, now legacy support recipients, in order to continue receiving their funds until a 5G fund auction occurs, they will have to start providing additional legacy support reporting to the FCC and to meet particular public interest obligations. And also those who are currently receiving legacy support while we are waiting for a 5G fund auction to come along will also be required to start spending specific percentages of the legacy support that they receive on 5G upgrades for the coverage area that they currently serve. And so those are big shifts. And we've gotten a lot of comment from providers out in America about how they want to operate that and what they see as pitfalls. One of the things that we've done to be responsive to the comment that we've gotten from providers is that sometimes bureaucratic time works on a different schedule than commercial time. And so we were trying to get some requirements in place for 2021. And obviously, given the time of year it is, most of the providers out there have already finished preparing all of their budgets and financials for 2021. And so what we're doing in response to that is that if current legacy support recipients aren't able to spend the percentage of funds that we require of them in 2021 on 5G upgrades because they've already dedicated all of their budget, they can roll those funds forward and certify to us in 2021 that they will spend them as directed in 2022. And sort of one of the last things that I wanted to talk about with the 5G fund is that we've adopted an adjustment factor. And I know that a lot of states that have either extremely rural areas, particularly impoverished rural areas, or states that have extremely difficult geographic terrain to cover have been looking for ways that those issues can be incorporated into USF auctions. And so our economists, working with outside economists, have really put an enormous amount of work into adopting an adjustment factor that can sort of put a thumb on the scale for either particularly difficult terrain geographically or particularly economically difficult to serve rural areas. And so that will be sort of baked into the bids for the 5G fund to try to make sure that those areas are more competitive in the reverse auction and receive a larger share of the funding that is auctioned. I think that's my last slide. So if it is, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Audra, very much. It was a great presentation. In fact, I want to thank Jessica, Susan, and Audra for taking the time today to give us that update from the federal side and what the FCC is doing to expand broadband in rural areas. A lot of great information you provided, so thank you very much. We're going to transition into our panel discussion. We're now moving on to that in our webinar portion here. Please feel free to type again any questions you have into the chat box. And each of our speakers coming up will have 5 minutes to give brief remarks, introducing themselves, and then we'll spend the rest of our time doing a Q&A. First up, we have Steve Hill, President of Satellite Broadcasting and Communications Association. Since 2004, Steve has represented the industry in efforts to ensure consumer rights, to install satellite dishes, fight discriminatory taxes, have the use of satellites to support disaster recovery, and educating stakeholders on the advances in satellite delivered high-speed broadband. Thanks for being here today, Steve. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the time, everybody. I appreciate you joining us. So as Matt said, I represent the consumer-based broadband industry, and we have over 2 million customers currently getting a high-speed satellite delivered broadband services. Those applications can be anything from residential to business applications. We're doing a lot of stuff with continuity for businesses. So if they've had a cable cut, they can rely on satellite. We're also doing telehealth, agriculture, e-commerce. There's all sorts of different options and things that are doing. And the nice thing with satellite is our infrastructure has been put into from space. So we just need to go to a consumer's house, put the dish on, and we're delivering service. One nice thing during the pandemic, we saw a huge increase of work from home, telecommutes, what have you, and we were able to install customers in a 3 to 5 day business window and continue to do so. Our technology delivers a 25.3 speed throughout the country, and in some cases significantly higher. The pandemic has not hurt. We haven't slowed things down during that pandemic. We've had to juggle some stuff, but it has not been something that's impacted the consumer side as much as we thought. Because there are two providers with satellite, there's also competitively priced. So the technology is out there, and we have two companies really working for those same customers, which are primarily in that rural market. We look at the rural market as a potential growth opportunity for our industry over the next decade. And what's exciting is within the next year and a half, both companies will be launching new satellites. Those satellites will quadruple the amount of capacity that is currently available and be able to offer speeds in excess of 100 meg throughout the country. So really by this time next year, we feel confident that we'll be seeing a dramatic increase in performance that we're able to deliver our customers. This is all currently private investment from both HughesNet and Viasat. And we also are seeing, and I'm sure you've heard a little bit about the SpaceX, with the low Earth satellites also are coming. And those are going to be a few years out before it's really delivered on a consumer side. But it's an exciting technology, and we feel satellite is part of the overall solution to solving connectivity in rural America. So I thank everybody for their time. I will let Matt introduce the next speaker.
All right, thank you, Steve. Our next panelist is Adam Falk, Senior Vice President of State Government Affairs at Charter Communications, which provides cable television, broadband, mobile service to over 30 million customers nationwide. Adam oversees all aspects of the company's legislative, regulatory, and government affairs activities at the state and local level. He has over 20 years of experience in the cable industry and spent 17 years with the Cable Vision Systems Corporation before joining Charter in January of 2015. Welcome, Adam, and take it away. You need to unmute, Adam. One of these days we'll get the hang of all this, right?
Yes,
Hopefully
exactly.
not.
I apologize for that. I want to thank NCSL for inviting me, and thank you, Representative Lehman, for the invitation as well. Charter is committed to building rural broadband. There's been a lot of talk today about wireless services, but we have been working diligently in the wired broadband space in our 41 state service area. We've connected more than 1.5 million homes and businesses in unserved areas in the last 2 years alone, and about 30% of that is actually in rural areas. Since 2016, we've invested $40 billion in infrastructure across the country, and that has allowed us to be able to provide high-speed data at 1 gigabit speeds, 940 megabit download services. It's been an interesting time for us, as we've had the opportunity to work collectively in the industry. And really, it's been an effort that's not just been our company, but really the entire industry that has stepped up during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the last 9 months alone, we've connected 450,000 new customers with a free internet service for a period of time. We also signed the FCC's Keep Americans Connected pledge, which enabled us to not terminate customers and to not initiate late fees on our customers through June 30th. Upon the conclusion of that, we were able to put our customers that had experienced hardships during the COVID-19 pandemic on payment plans, and we excused over $85 million in debt to allow customers to keep connected. For us, rural broadband has been both an effort in the state legislatures and from a service perspective. In our 41 state service territory, about 23 of the states that we serve currently have low-cost broadband grant programs that we've worked to establish. Those programs have enabled us to spend and receive $22 million worth of grants in the past 18 months alone to build broadband to literally thousands of new homes and businesses across the country. So it's been a great opportunity for us to work in those states and work with policymakers to enable more broadband deployment across the country. In the upcoming legislative sessions next year, we expect 10 more states to work with us as we try to put in place these grant programs. And before the end of the year, we're still working in 2 states that have legislative sessions that continue in Pennsylvania and Ohio. So we're really optimistic and hopeful that we'll be able to continue to utilize those programs to get more rural areas connected. In terms of the programs themselves, I think the focus on them for policymakers really needs to be on ensuring that the money is going to unserved areas, those places that have 25.3 speeds or less, that the programs have adequate challenge processes to make sure that the money actually is going to unserved areas and are not in areas where they would constitute competitive overbuilds, and that they're open, fair, transparent, and technology neutral in terms of attracting more investment and more company participation. One thing that we think is really important for policymakers is not to use sort of a carrot and stick approach. Instead of creating these programs and then conditioning them with a whole bunch of new regulatory obligations that make folks less inclined to participate, we have been working with states to try to put in place reasonable rules that allow us to invest, but don't sort of get into regulatory spaces that are beyond the jurisdiction of the states, things like open access or net neutrality provisions, or pricing or speed restrictions. So we look forward to working with the states on that in the months and years to come. I wanted to just mention briefly one other issue that has been a central concern of ours as we've tried to invest more in rural broadband, and that is the archaic rules that exist for attachment of our network to poles and infrastructure that are in the public rights of way. The FCC and states typically have rules that relate to investor-owned utilities, telecommunications and electric investor-owned utilities that own that infrastructure. But what we found is that in most states, and in almost all of them, there are no rules that exist that relate to municipal electric companies and co-op electric companies. And that has resulted in instances where the cost of investment in rural broadband has been significantly increased. It's not uncommon to have 7, 8, 9, 10 times the pole attachment rates with co-ops and municipal electrics than you have with investor-owned utilities. There aren't the same set of rules that ensure the make-ready process is done in a timely manner, or that disputes between broadband providers and electric utilities are resolved. And so we really would encourage states to look more closely at those rules, to look at ways in which they can be enhanced and strengthened, particularly with municipal and electric co-ops, in order to ensure the faster and more efficient investment and distribution into rural areas. Finally, I just wanted to say a word about another issue involving pole ownership that we've been working hard on, and this is an issue that involves both investor-owned utilities and municipal and co-op electrics. The astronomical costs associated with the requirement to replace poles during the rural broadband deployments. We've been working in upstate New York on a project. About 30% of all of the costs associated with build out go to make ready, which is the process in which the electric utilities put their poles in a condition that would allow for new attachments. And about 30% of all those make ready costs are associated with pole replacements. Electric utilities can tell you that there's no capacity left on the pole, and that if you want to build broadband there, you have to pay for the replacement costs associated with those poles. They can do that whether or not the pole has been fully depreciated as a capital investment. They can set the conditions for which broadband providers are required to pay those costs, whether they like them or not. And that really drives the cost of these deployments up significantly. There are many instances in which pole owners have replacement schedules and poles that are prepared to be replaced, in which they wait for a request from a broadband provider to attach. and then shift those costs over to the providers. So we would like to see changes at the state and federal level to ensure better opportunities for us to build to broadband to rural areas in a cheaper and less expensive way. And one of the principal ways in which we think that can occur is with better rules associated with pole replacements. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Happy to take any questions, and we look forward to working with state legislators and regulators across the country to achieve additional build out and investment in rural areas.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adam. I appreciate that. Our last panelist is Matt Dunn, founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovation. Matt served 11 years in the Vermont State Senate and House, probably better than the House. I'm just throwing that out there. In enacting the state's first broadband grants and downtown redevelopment program. In 2007, he started Google's Community Affairs Division, where he led all local U.S. philanthropy, and also served as director of AmeriCorps Vista under President Clinton, where he led Power Up, one of the first national efforts to bridge the digital divide. Thanks for being here, Matt. Take it away.
Representative, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I was an active member in NCSL in my past life as a legislator, vice chair of what I think was the Economic Development Committee at the time. And it's just the service that is provided to legislators across the country is immeasurable. And I'm honored to be a participant. The Center on Rural Innovation was created to address the economic divide that has emerged between urban and rural places, particularly since the Great Recession. As many people know, when the recession hit, everyone came crashing down, but the recovery was fundamentally different, with urban areas coming roaring back and rural areas not so much. And the reasons behind that were really threefold. One was automation of traditional rural jobs. The second was globalization by policy, but also by technology, allowing for rapid prototyping and collaboration with manufacturers anywhere in the world, not just lower cost manufacturers in rural places. And also the decline of entrepreneurship in rural America for the 30 years that preceded. What it meant was we didn't have the farm team when that economic shock happened to come in behind those companies that naturally go away and to be able to come in and replace them and create the jobs of the future. So we work with communities all across the country. We're in 18 states in all 4 time zones, helping to build digital economy ecosystems, because at the end of the day, the divide that emerged was because there were jobs created by automation and globalization in the US. The problem was they were almost exclusively created in urban areas, and the jobs that were removed were almost exclusively in rural. And we believe that it is critical to create digital economy jobs because right now, rural America represents 15% of the nation's workforce, but only 5% of the technology jobs. And we think that if you're going to get economic equity across geography, you need to bring that up to 15%. Doesn't mean all rural jobs should be technology, and doesn't mean all technology jobs should be in rural, but there should be a piece of all rural communities' economies that are going to be resilient as automation continues. And of course, as we've seen with the pandemic, that automation is just accelerating even faster. But what the pandemic did was really lay bare what happens when you don't have universal broadband in our country. And we're seeing places across the United States where young people aren't being able to participate in school, where individuals who are going to remote work have to drive to a library and sit outside in their car to be able to get their job done, and where people are not able to take advantage of telehealth. And so what we're hearing is across the aisle, a real urgency to solve this issue once and for all. And we believe that at a fundamental level, because if you're going to deliver jobs of the future and digital economy jobs and entrepreneurship that's scalable in rural places, you've got to be on an equal playing field with the other technology centers. So we believe firmly that we need to be moving to fiber to the home throughout the country. In the short term, it is absolutely crucial to have all of the players coming to help make a connectivity for the next year or two a reality, and that's why the satellite providers are a huge help. That's why companies like Charter and others being able to do line extensions and provide subsidy is fantastic. But the long-term solution really is fiber to the home, and we think that's absolutely critical. And the good news is that many parts of rural America have demonstrated with their own grit and tenacity the ability to build those kinds of systems. And so today, census tracts representing over 10 million rural people have gigabit speed internet, faster internet than exists, than you can usually get in New York City or San Francisco. And that gives them a real competitive advantage, especially as they're trying to build software jobs and other technology jobs in those smaller communities across the board. We're actively involved with working with communities in different parts of the country on helping them do the planning for creating those kinds of broadband services, either through public-private partnerships, sometimes through all private organizations, and sometimes through creative solutions like communications networks that are able to bridge across the traditional boundaries of municipalities and counties. And telecommunication union districts are really innovative ways that communities can come together and they can use public avenues to access capital, and then to work in partnership with private companies or do it on their own to be able to deliver that kind of service to their communities. What we're also doing is working with some communities on how to deal with the immediate crisis, on how to work with the folks who already provide that infrastructure to be able to get it to low-income families who are struggling, as well as with satellite and wireless providers to make sure that families and young people in rural places are able to get that in the immediate term while still looking towards the long term of building out that infrastructure for the long term. I'd encourage folks, if they're interested, to check out our website at ruralinnovation.us. You can learn more about the work that we're doing, both on broadband, but also on building digital economy jobs and innovation hubs with inspiring communities following their leadership across the country.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate all that. We'll now move into our kind of question and answers for the webinar. We have a few questions that have already been submitted. Do not forget, if you have a question, type it in the chat box. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to participants. Any questions that do not get answered today will be answered via email. So a couple of them that are out here. Number one, I'm going to tee this up a little bit for the three panelists. I think, Matt, you used the term solve the issue. And I think that's what we've been working around for a long time. And so, and also you kind of plugged the education broadband meeting on December 7th, which is, that is a key piece to this whole rural broadband is the education piece. I represent a rural district, a rural school district, and we have people who live a mile from the school and cannot get it, good internet access. So it kind of brings it around to this. And that is, I'm going to kind of wrap all this in. I think, Adam, you brought up some of the issues facing from the standpoint of the legislative process, attachment fees, replacing the poles, et cetera. I'm going to throw this out. Maybe I'll start with you, Steve, and then Adam, or Steve to Matt, and then to Adam, if there's anything to add. So when we talk about the setting this up for what is the hurdles, what is helping us to not get to where we can solve this issue, what would each of you say is right now the most important action as a state legislator and in my legislative body? What can we do to expand rural access? Is there something that we're missing, or is there a hurdle that needs to be taken down? Steve, I'll start with you, and then Matt, if you want to chime in, and Adam close. But just take a few minutes to maybe answer that as to what do you think might be the one most important issue?
Sure. So from our standpoint, there's really, I'll put it two issues. One on the funding side, there really is a focus on fiber. Fiber is probably the best solution, but in rural markets, it's just not going to be feasible to do a connection that's two customers over a 2-mile thing, or you're going by, the fiber can go past somebody's driveway, but they're 1/4 mile in. Who's paying that fee? So, as we're looking at on the satellite side and funding, we'd like to see funding that would go towards help offset the cost of that consumer equipment. So our consumer equipment, although we launched the satellite for $750 million, costs about $1,000 to put that terminal on the consumer's house. And currently we're having to charge that full amount to the consumer, whereas a lot of our wireline competitors are getting funds for their infrastructure. And we'd like to say, look, let's look at it on a per subscriber basis, and funding could go when the customer takes the service. That would help offset whether it's, perhaps it's a credit, perhaps it's, a $600 per year credit to those consumers, and they can pick whatever service they want. There should be some flexibility. And we also look at it as, maybe there's a 3 to 5 year window where people are getting funding to be able to put satellites so they can get options now, but then there's a long term as this technology changes. Look, somebody came to me the other day and said, well, we want to have a future-proof bill. And I said, give me anything that's future-proof, anything. There is nothing future-proof, right? So we didn't, we've got 5G coming. We've got a lot of different aspects of this. And, we'd like to let's look at a little bit model on the state side for maybe either voucher or funding, so that it's that, and on a per subscriber basis, as opposed to how many homes we passed. From the state, if you paid on a per subscriber basis, there's a net benefit because you're only taking people that actually want that service. And we can help offset that cost dramatically. If the state, if we receive funding for our consumer equipment, that would actually dramatically drop the cost to the consumer, because right now we're having to build that cost in. So, satellite can be part of that solution. It can be immediately a bridge before wired technology can come out in 3 to 5 years. Or it could be something for the railroad customers, that true solution that is going to be their only option. And in some cases that's going to be the case for the foreseeable future, just from the overall cost of infrastructure to reach those people, that last 5% or 10% of those customers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, and interested to hear what you have to say.
Sure. Steve is right. In the near term, we need to have every option on the table to be able to provide broadband to people who need it in the immediate term. And that needs to include the way that we do the incentives to be able to allow for that kind of in-home equipment for folks who live way, way, way off in rural places. And it's just going to be a long time to be able to connect to it. But the challenge we're facing, frankly, is not that much different from the challenges that was faced around the same time in the last century when we delivered rural electrification. And when we delivered rural electrification, it wasn't, delivering money so that people could have their own teeny tiny windmill at their farm or a little, turbine to run in the brook next to their house. It was actually to create the infrastructure to allow for rural places to have access to the same kind of scale of electricity as was available in urban places, to put folks on an equal playing field. And I think we need that same kind of initiative now. And you can see it in state by states doing it, to be able to put the real resources on the ground, to be able to deliver long-term solutions while they're also trying to address the short-term ones. And the reason why fiber is emphasized is that it uses speed of light. I'm not a physicist, but it's hard to get much faster than that when you're delivering bits and bytes. And if you look back, even 10 years ago, people were like, why would you ever need 25x3 connectivity? That's so fast. That's crazy. The speeds that is going to be required to just continue to participate on an equitable basis with with folks in urban places is going to continue to accelerate over time. So it's super important to keep our eye on the ball of building out fiber to the home. Again, millions of rural folks have been able to do that usually through public-private partnerships, so that they're using the same kinds of structures that even brought them electricity. So municipal electric companies going and doing it in partnership or on their own, cooperative electric companies, small telephone companies have been, just building out fiber. So these are the kinds of creative approaches that are really important to support and foster while you're addressing the immediate need that Steve is talking about. So what I would say on a legislative basis, there's some things that can be done. Adam was absolutely right. You need to make sure that pole attachment laws are predictable and are ones that do not punish bringing broadband. It needs to be able to allow it at a reasonable fee. I'm personally a big advocate of one-touch make-ready solutions that can be done, so you can build that out in a way that is economically feasible, and you can get much further out for the same dollar. The other part that I would really encourage legislatures to consider is to look at the laws they have in their books that prohibit public entities from being able to work with either private providers or on their own to be able to bring broadband. There are so many creative ways that if you unlock that potential, that local municipalities or electric co-ops or counties can go out and actually build that kind of infrastructure. Sometimes they may want to run it themselves. Sometimes they'll work with an ISP that's either large or small to be able to deliver it, and they can bring high-speed internet. But many states prohibit that from even happening. And even more, don't allow for things like municipalities to be able to bond for that kind of infrastructure to be able to deliver to their citizens. And while you need to be careful and you need to put guardrails around that, in a variety of ways, it makes no sense when you're trying to address solving the problem, which we believe is actually possible and in our grasp. But you've got to make sure that you allow for the same kind of creativity that brought us rural electrification to be able to deliver broadband to every home in the United States.
So let me ask this if I can, Adam. I don't want to cut you off. I'm going to kind of bring another question into this, and I'll let you answer first. And that is, if we kind of go to the 30,000-foot view, what I get from constituents, the question of is, the federal government, along with state governments, has spent billions of dollars on rural broadband. And the question I still get is, why don't I have it? And so what we have is, I think according to this, we have like 18 million Americans who still do not have access. So with all these billions spent, how do we take a bigger, a high view? When you talked to Adam about pole attachment fees or the cost to replace poles and that, sometimes gets lost, I think, on the consumer. So kind of that, how do you just kind of give a direct answer? And some of that's going to be, is it the speed issue? Is it the cost issue? What are some of the things that when we talk about having this lack of access, having spent these billions of dollars? And I think someone had asked on the chat, that the FCC mapping, they had passed the Data Act, but nothing's been done with that as far as funding, et cetera. So it is mapping the issue. I think some of the mapping, talking about the rural electrification, we're a much better place today to know who needs what than they were 100 years ago, but still we seem to be out of touch sometimes with that data. So Adam, I'll maybe start with you. What do you see as the biggest reason and how can we fix that we haven't yet got to the majority, to a lot of these unused service areas?
The biggest obstacle, and the answer to your question is that the money has been either spent in the wrong place, or it's been offered with too many restrictions that have made it untenable for folks to participate. And that's really what it comes down to. If you look at like the federal USF program for years had and still has what they call eligible telecommunications carrier requirements associated with taking federal money. And those create new regulatory burdens on broadband providers that has made it unattractive in the past to participate in those programs. What the federal and state governments need to do is spend the money, spend it in the right way, and remove the obstacles and conditions associated with doing that. I appreciate that Matt said that I was right about pole attachment and pole attachment rules, and I appreciate that. But I would have to say that that he was wrong in one really important area, and that is, Steve asked about future-proof solutions and having future-proof solutions. Well, the cable industry is a future-proof solution to providing rural broadband in these communities. You don't need fiber to the home technology. We offer a hybrid fiber coax network that uses fiber significantly in our network, but we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars building a hybrid fiber coax network already, and there is no need to replace that network with fiber to the home technology. I mean, if you go to NCTA's website, the Internet and Television Association's website, you can find all the information you need on the next generation of 10G technology from the cable industry, in which we'll be able to provide in very short order 10 gig symmetrical speeds over an existing cable network by simply upgrading the quality of the modems that we use to deliver our services. That is a solution. Right now, we have 1 gig networks that are available almost ubiquitously. I mean, 99% of Charter's footprint of 30 million customers and 100 million homes passed has has access. I'm sorry, not 100 million, 50 million homes passed has access to 1 gig internet speeds. You can get that from the cable industry, and it's available. What you need to do is 3 solutions. One is do what Indiana has done in your state, create broadband grant programs, and invest more money in them than you currently are. Make them larger, make them available to everybody, and use appropriations from the state rather than new surcharges in order to fund them. So that's one. The second is you need to create tax credit programs in the states that encourage investment in broadband infrastructure, and that will go a long way. And then the third, and perhaps the most important that I talked about earlier, is you've got to tackle this issue of pole access. It is the one monopoly service that remains out there in our industry today, and that is the best and most effective way to build broadband infrastructure is to attach your network to poles that are owned by, in many cases, entities that are completely unregulated and can do whatever they want. And many of those entities are now actually even thinking about getting into the broadband business, which makes it even more likely that they'll use that monopoly status to try to prevent broadband providers like Charter and Comcast and Cox and others utilizing their network to get into the business. So you have to address those pole attachment issues. You have to address pole rental fees, and you have to address the time in which it takes to get an application for an attachment to a pole completed. I mean, we have instances in which we go 9 months, 12 months before an electric utility, a co-op, is willing to give us pole attachment rights. It's too long, and those people are just waiting and waiting to get broadband service from us, and they can't.
All right, Steve or Matt, do you want to chime in on the last couple minutes we have here?
I would also say, the other challenge we see is there's 2 issues that I always bring up when I'm talking to states. There's availability and affordability, and that's one of the other challenges we have as everybody. We can deliver the service to a consumer's house. Adam can deliver service to the consumer's house, but it has to, the cost to that consumer a lot of times is going to be beyond what they can afford and what they can do. So, I mean, we've had discussions with people say, you know, I'll use an example. There's a community in Maine. They ran about $1.5 million worth of fiber throughout the community, and they had 10 customers sign up. And, you know, I texted one of my members, I'm like, how many customers we have? I'm like, we have 8. You know, and the reason was, it truly was an affordability. So as the states look at, you know, different funding options, you know, we've actually set up a program with New York where there was a funding option, and it actually also, because of that, we, the consumers that qualified for that, a discounted rate of service. So, you know, there has to be some sort of model as we look into this of being able to expand broadband to everywhere, because it really is an essential service, but also make sure that it can be an affordable service that people can utilize. And that can be both in a rural market and an urban market. I think probably even more case in an urban market where you're having people that can't afford it than not. So, you know, I would just like to say, as states look at it, it can't just be availability. We also have to look at affordability.
All right, Matt, I'll give you the last word on this. We need to wrap up here, but go ahead.
Great. Well, I mean, I think something that Steve and Adam and I would all agree on is that competition is good. The ability to have multiple options for consumers is a great thing. And it's important that you create the scenario where all kinds of different ways of delivering broadband can happen. It tends to drive down costs for consumers. It also tends to increase the innovation that Adam was talking about bringing faster and faster internet speeds using existing infrastructure that's out there, or new infrastructure like Steve's, you know, folks are deploying, or that creative folks at the municipal level are being able to bring with fiber to the home and being able to support speeds that are very, very fast and very competitive. I think 2 things, though, that are also important, aside from the things that we mentioned, is information. That it's super important that when people are thinking about internet speeds, they're not just thinking about download speeds, but upload speeds, especially when you have video conferencing as a core to being able to learn and to work. And really the standard, given where video conferencing is going, should be upload speeds of not 3 megabits, but 10, 20, even 100 megabits, and as a minimum to be able to really participate on an interactive basis. And that's something that people should at least understand as they're looking for both short-term and long-term solutions, that upload speed is critical. And then the other one about the FCC mapping efforts, look, this isn't that hard. This isn't that hard. We should be able to, in the greatest economy in the world, be able to tell people where there is broadband, what speed broadband, and the price of that broadband, and have it be accurate. And unfortunately, the FCC maps just aren't that. They haven't really engaged with the carriers to get that really accurate, and it's not even consistently accurate. You know, in some states, it's pretty close. In other states, it's way off. And until we have that information, we don't have the power as folks who are in policy positions or in folks who are working with communities trying to get this, or even providers, to know where to build, where to prioritize. And so I'm hopeful that the FCC will move quickly to work with the providers that are out there, get that accurate data, and allow people to make the best possible decisions.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. You guys did a great job. I appreciate all your presentations and your expertise, obviously. Thank the audience for your time as you sat patiently listening and submitting some questions. This does conclude this. This will be archived and posted on the NCSL's website. So check back and if you've got want some more data, a lot of information out there today. It was very good. Just go to ncsl.org and you'll be able to find it in the archives there. With that, have a great rest of your day, and we will be adjourned. And again, thank you everyone for your participation. Look forward to seeing you on December the 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody have a good day.
Thanks.